Hello, my name is Kern. Welcome to something new for the channel. This is a kind of deck building, brewing tips, specifically as it relates to how to make your decks more competitive and just general advice. I'm experimenting to see if I want to do more videos like this, see how fun it is to make, see what kind of reaction it gets. I wanted to make videos like this because I really enjoy brewing, especially trying to make competitive brews that will be able to defeat all the popular meta decks in whatever format I'm playing in. That's the thing that I find the most fun. I've been doing that for the last several years. I've learned a bit, and I still have a lot to learn. But one great way for me to learn is by providing feedback to other people's decks. So this is kind of like a mutual learning space, for anybody who wants to submit a deck list. I have 3 volunteers today, 3 different decks I'm looking at, and just thank you so much to those folks who were willing to have their deck featured. And first up here, we have a brew from Totally Tailored. This is their very first Magic brew, I think. Let me just confirm that for myself. Yeah, they say it's the first deck that they've built, so that's really awesome. Their whole idea behind this is that they wanted to do a build around of Kappa-Tech Reckler. And let's see if I can't make that a little bit bigger here. Yeah, okay, good. My face is not blocking that completely. You can't see the mana cost, so maybe I'll move my camera over slightly somewhere. So you can see it. There we go. It's 1 colorless and a green. If you haven't seen this card, it has Ninjutsu, 1 and a green. It enters with a death touch counter on it, and if it deals combat damage to a player, you can remove the death touch counter, and when you do, exile target artifact or enchantment that player controls. So kind of an interesting removal spell, but I think that their idea was to make a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles deck, so they wanted to have mutate ninjutsu stuff going on, all of that. That was a thought, of course, I had too when I first saw this card. I think it lends itself well to that. And so they've built a deck around this, and I'm so thankful to them for being willing to have their deck featured here and to get a little bit of video form feedback. And I have to say that this is part of Magic that I love, is there's a funny card or a funny even just name for the deck, and I want to see if I can't make this work. So what we're going to be building here and trying to, we're going to end up with a list at the end, kind of looking at what the list is now and then a new list at the end. And I imagine, I haven't completed the list yet, but I imagine what we're going to end up with is not the absolute most competitive deck that you could have in the format, but something that does what Totally Taylor wanted to do with this deck, but allows it to win more frequently. Now, there's always a spectrum, right? Like on this side of the spectrum, there's the I just want to have fun and play totally thematically, pay big creatures or whatever, and it's more janky perhaps. And then on this side of the spectrum, it's more spike, I just want to win games. The truth is that no matter where you land on the spectrum, Magic is more fun when your deck can do what it wants to do better, and when it's more consistent, and when you have a greater possibility of winning. So whether or not you're out to win all the tournaments, I really do hope that you can take some of these deck building tips to heart, either for the original deck designer themselves or for whoever else might be watching this video. So yeah, with that in mind, let's take a quick look at the list here. I'm going to put it into CMC mode. I've imported the list into AetherHub just because I like the visual tools here. And I will link to their actual deck list down below in the place that they uploaded it. So that place, you can comment there and interact directly with them if you would like. But yeah, this is divided up by converted mana cost. So we have all of our 1-drops here. March the Swirling Mist doesn't really belong here. I can't move this because it's not Arena. But you know what I mean. So here's the 2-drops, 3-drops, 4-drops, 5-drops, and 6-drops. Or 6, 7, plus. So just taking a look at the curve to start, the curve looks pretty reasonable. Without knowing anything else about this deck or what it's trying to do, this looks like a pretty reasonable curve to me. It's if I scroll down here, there's some nice helpful tools on this, as there are in a lot of websites like this. It's got an average converted mana cost of 2.53. Of course, that's counting X cost cards like March of the Swirling Mist as if it was 1 mana cost card, which it's not. But that's probably pretty close to what this list actually is. So pretty low to the ground in terms of mana cost. Maybe you might need some higher cost spells. But that's the first thing I noticed, is that the curve looks good, so well done. And there's also a nice plethora of 2-drops, which is also very important. In most decks, the most cards you want are in the 2-drop slot. That's not true for all decks, but a lot of them that's true for. And you want an average CMC around 3. So we have a 2.53, which doesn't necessarily mean that we need to increase that. It just depends on what you're trying to do with your deck. but that could be something that we might want to increase. So let me just clarify terms here. When I say CMC, I mean converted mana cost. There's a new evergreen word that we're using now called mana value. Instead of converted mana cost, it's a little easier to say, but you'll still see it called CMC or converted mana cost in other places like this. And then, of course, we have some lands here. So I'm just kind of ignoring the lands for now and taking a look at the cards. I'm not going to go through every single card on this list and kind of critique it, although we are going to look at some card evaluation as it concerns deck building and what to include and what not to include. But the second thing I noticed when I looked at this list, and you might have noticed right away as well, is that there are a lot of singleton cards. There's not a lot of 4 ofs and 3 ofs, which is what you want your deck to mostly consist of. So if I go to, let's just say I go to standard best of 1, and most of the decks that are going to get lots of views here on Aetherhub are going to be fairly competitive. So here we go. Here's a CGB list, Esper Rotation Proof Standard. Let's just check this out here. He's got some 2 ofs, a 1 of Infernal Grasp, 2, 3, 2, 1, 4, 4, 3, 4, 2, 4. So a lot of 4 ofs. In fact, this is maybe even fewer 4 or 3 ofs than you might ordinarily expect. Let's take a look at this in response to Titans of Industry list by MTG Malone. And we've got 4 Shambling Gas, 3 Misty Reflection, 4 Tend the Pest. Wait a minute, this is looking very similar to a deck that I posted. Interesting. 3 Meathook Massacre, 4 Desert Dispute, 4 Prosperous Innkeeper, 4 Shadowed Shakedown Heavy. I've never even seen that card before played. 3 Fight Rigging, 2 Demagoth Titan. So yeah, so 3 of, 2 of. So you can see that there's a lot more 4 ofs here. So the reason why that is you want your deck to go off consistently. You want it to do its thing consistently. Now, that's not going to be true for all lists, and some lists can get away with more singletons than others. But if you're not in a singleton format with a restriction that says you may only play 1 copy of each card, generally it's better to play multiple copies of fewer cards. So that your deck can do what it wants to do more consistently. You can design around being able to consistently have certain interactions or synergies or curves. And this is the other big thing about deck building that is important about why, how to make it consistent by having more 4 ofs, 3 ofs, etc. When you're designing a deck, you want to think about the first 4 or 5 turns of the game and what you're hoping is going to happen. This is called curving out. You might hear it referenced a few ways in regards to curves, but it's called curving out. On turn 1, you generally want to play a 1-drop. On turn 2, you generally want to play a 2-drop. Turn 3, 3-drop, etc. And sometimes maybe turn 2 is like a 2-mana removal spell. Maybe it's not something that stays on the board. But that's how you kind of want to think about the game. Now, whatever strategy you have, whether you're aggro, control, whatever strategy that you're taking with your deck, you do want to spend all your mana, and you do want to think about what am I doing with that mana. So sometimes some decks, like control decks, won't even have a turn 1 play, and that's okay sometimes. But generally, you want to think about what am I doing turn 1, turn 2, turn 3, turn 4, etc. Or, well, not etc., just turn 5. We're only thinking about the first 5 turns, really. Because most games are decided in those first 5 turns. So if you don't have a consistency in your deck, then that means that it's really difficult for you to plan a curving strategy that's going to help you consistently to do your thing. And when you're planning that strategy, it's not just like in a perfect world, I'd play this creature turn 1, that exact creature turn 2, this exact creature turn 3. Even when you're playing 4 and 3 of those cards, you still need to think about, well, I won't always have that 1-drop in my hand. I won't always have this 2-drop. So think about the variations. What if I don't have a 1-drop, and then I play this 2-drop instead, and then I get this 3-drop? How does that combine? And that's already a lot to think about when your deck is only consists of, let's say, 15 different cards, and then 3s and 4s of those cards. That's already very difficult to think about and optimize among that many cards. So that's another reason why having fewer cards but more copies of them helps your deck to be more consistent. All right, the third thing I noticed about this deck is that there is not enough interaction, or maybe even like high value interaction. So by interaction, I mean, how are you disrupting your opponent's strategy, whatever that is. Sometimes interaction can even be in the form of protecting your own things, but generally that looks like removal spells. So like bounce, destroy, counter spells, whatever. So I do see a little bit of interaction in that regard. March of the Swirling Mist can be used as a sort of tempo removal by phasing out your opponent's things. In a deck that's focused on ninjutsu, in particular, having unblocked creatures, that can actually be really valuable. Get their blockers out of the way, phase them out. So yes, and it's also interaction in the form of protection. I also saw Ninja's Kunai, which will allow you to deal 3 damage to any target sometimes. Witness Protection, which makes a creature lose all abilities and become a 1/1. Disdainful Stroke, which is a counterspell. And I think there's a couple others. Planar Incision isn't really removal, so I'm not going to count that. Rapid Bite, it's a fight spell, or a bite spell, rather. Devious Cover-Up, which is a counter spell. Mind Flayer, which could allow you to take control of a creature for as long as it stays on the board. So it is a form of removal, but that's the removal that I see in the deck. And all of those were 1-ofs. So I don't know if I really want to say that like there's a number of removal spells that you should run, but generally if I see a deck with like fewer than 8, and 8 is already pretty few, that's not going to be enough removal for the vast majority of decks to be able to do what it wants to do consistently. You have to interrupt what your opponent is doing. That's very important. Sometimes those removals can also act not just as removals, but play some other role in your deck. Like, for example, Mind Flayer is an example of a card that is a creature as well as a removal spell. Or March of the Swirling Mist. I mentioned how it's sort of like removal in some ways, but it also has this added value of, giving you protection. When they try to target your things, you can phase them out. So, sometimes you can get added value by having it be not just removal and do some other function in the deck. But yeah, I would say this deck needs some more removal. And finally, the big thing that I notice here is that there's not enough high value plays. And that doesn't just mean high mana plays, although often higher mana plays are going to have higher value. And we did notice that we had a very low curve here at 2.53. And, when I look at the cards, if I were to try to classify this deck strategy, I would probably say this is mid-range, or it's trying to be mid-range. And I think that, you want to kind of curve out more consistently, and you do want to have some big things on your top end, but regardless of not just high mana value, but just high value in general. So what I'm really talking about is I'm talking about card evaluation. What cards are good and what cards are going to have a big impact on the game when you play them. So let's just start off with Kappa-Tech Reckler. So this is the whole build around card, right? I'm not going to remove this from the list when I make my own version because this is the whole point, right? The flavor of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and you can't get a better turtle than this. But as far as card evaluation goes, this is a decent card in Limited to an extent, partially because it has Death Touch on it, and it's definitely a decent sideboard card in Limited because it can help you remove artifacts and enchantments. You can sideboard that back in. However, in a constructed format like Standard, or in this case, this was designed around Pioneer, this is very hard to get its real full value out of. It's conditional artifact and enchantment removal. 1/3 creature is not very good, even with Death Touch on it. It's not like very high value. I would say that that this is what we'd call like a tempo neutral play. Spending this 2 mana would neither get you above and beyond where you should be spending 2 mana, and it won't, really make you get behind on what you would normally get spending 2 mana. It's almost as good as a 2 mana 2/2, but we're not going to cut this card. But just taking a look at some of the other cards in the deck, Sigh of Shinobi is a great example of a card that is not adding a lot of value. So it says, equipped creature gets +1/+1, and whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may attach Sigh of the Shinobi to it. So it's a 1/1 equipment that can very easily attach to a creature that's entering. Again, this equipment might be better in Limited than it is in a constructed format, but this is a really low value card that's not going to have a high impact on the board. An important thing, like it would take a whole series, an entire long series of videos for me to get deep into card evaluation. And so I can't really do that in this short form format when I'm going to be trying to look at 3 decks. But I will just say one thing that you can think about in terms of is this card high value is on its own in a vacuum. How good is it? Is it going to have a big impact on the game on its own? In that regard, it's very, very, very difficult for equipment to do that. Which is why you don't see a lot of equipment that is able to make it to that point where it is a very competitive card. There are always exceptions to that, like there's Embercleave, for example, or there's the Maul of the Skyclaves. But in general, it's really hard for equipment or auras to be able to get to that place because on their own in a vacuum, they aren't really good. Now, you may be able to design your deck around it and enable it to do its thing and have the high synergy or whatever, and then maybe they get a lot better. But that's one way to think about it. Another thing is, what is the card trying to do? So let's take a look at Expendable Lackey. This is a 1 mana 1/1. So mana neutral in that regard is one way to think of, or tempo neutral in that regard is one way to think about it. You can pay 2 mana and exile it from your yard in order to create a 1/1 creature that can't be blocked. That is interesting because we're playing around with ninjutsu, so we want to have creatures that are not being blocked. So creating something that gives unblockable is a nice way to do that. This is not the greatest way to get an unblockable creature. Like, there are other higher value ways to do this. Even if you're focused on building a deck with a budget, there are some budget cards that we're going to take a look at that will allow you to do this in a better way than Expendable Lackey. This is generally not going to be a high value play. If you're playing this as a 1 mana 1/1, maybe it chumps, but it's not helping you out on the board a heck of a lot. And then even spending 2 mana to exile it from the yard to create a 1/1 unblockable isn't super high value compared to some of the other unblockable cards that we're going to take a look at. So that's the other thing that I would say, the other critique I'd have of this deck, is that in general, it just needs stronger cards in order to help it do its thing, which doesn't necessarily mean you have to spend more money. Okay, now we're going to look at what I might do, what my process might be for like how I might go about leveling up this fun brew. The first thing that you're going to want to do is just try to find good cards or find cards that might work with your synergy. So like I might want to look for ninjutsu, and pulled up here I have the Gatherer site. This is just gather.wizards.com. I highly recommend that you check this out if you brew. If you're not using this already, it's so useful. And very simply you could do something like, this is just the simple side of the search, right? I can just do ninjutsu. I can say card format Pioneer and make sure that I'm selected on the text there, and do a search, and then that'll bring me up every single card in Pioneer that has the ninjutsu keyword on it. It might take a little bit because there's probably going to be a lot of them that has to search to. So there we go. I've got a page of ninjutsu results. Although this looks like no, okay, maybe that is all. Maybe that is it. You could also do advanced. So let's say that I wanted either for cards to have ninjutsu or unblockable. I don't know, that's not a great example, but I could do that. I could say or. I would just do 2 separate searches, really, but I just want to show this side of it because I think the advanced search is actually really important. Ninjutsu or unblockable, add, and of course we're going to want to add, again, the Pioneer format, and we'll go there. Although I don't think unblockable is a word that you see on cards, so if this is probably not going to pull up any unblockable things. It usually says can't be blocked. So this looks like the same exact results as well. When you are searching, it's good to know what your synergies or what the cards you're looking for, how that might actually be worded on the card itself. So that's one way to do it. Another way is you can use Arena's search tool as well. When you search for cards, they have a way to do that too. And there are some like nice keywords and search strings you can use. Like you can say like, where POW, short for power, is greater than 1. And it'll show you all creatures that have power greater than 1, that kind of thing. So what I might do to start is I'm looking for what cards might have good synergies or might play into the theme or whatever. And also, it's really important to know what are the most competitive cards in the format. Now, I'm not super familiar with Pioneer. However, I am super familiar with the last, 3-4 years of Standard. So I generally know all the best cards in the last 4 years, which is relevant to Pioneer. But that's an important thing. If you're unsure, you might go to, say, something like Aether Hub, and you might go click on Pioneer and just start looking through some of the top decks. Again, not all of these are going to be competitive, hyper competitive, but a lot of them will have some of the better cards in the format. So you can start to see like, am I playing in these colors? What cards should I be playing in these colors? Let's see if we can't find a deck that's in our colors. I want high view count. That's important. And let's say Sultai Ramp Tiger. That's close enough to the colors we're in. So Elder Gargaroth, that's a great example of a very high value card, and that's something that we're short on. So that could be good. Trample works really well with mutants or with mutate. So yeah, that could be a good mutate target. Growth Spiral, excellent blue-green card. Hydroid Crisis, of course. So if you were unsure what are the best cards in the format in your colors, I would suggest looking at deck lists, whether that's Aether Hub or somewhere else, and seeing what's out there, seeing what people are playing. And then once I've found some good cards and I'm ready to go from there, then I'll see what I have and see, okay, where can we take this deck? So let me show you what I've come up with. I've already done a search for some cards. All right, these are the cards that I found. So first off, I'm going to be constructing this deck not for Pioneer, but for Explorer. That's partially because I'm not as familiar with all the cards that are relevant in Pioneer. I'm much more familiar with the cards that are relevant in Explorer. And also it allows me to do it in Arena, and I can like play test the deck if I want, and so that's why I'm doing it here. These are just the cards that I pulled out that seemed like they would be good in this type of deck, just what kind of came to me. Thousand Face Shadow. So first of all, in my main board here, how I have this organized, these are all the cards that have to do with Mutate or Ninjutsu. And then in the sideboard are just good cards in colors that we might be working with. Maybe the first thing you might notice is that I've added the color black. That's just because that there are good black cards that would make sense in this deck. And of course with Ninjutsu, we're going to have access to some good black cards. So Thousand Face Shadow, let's start off here. Why is this good? This doesn't see a ton of play in Ninjutsu decks, first of all. But it could be good in our deck because it can create a token that's a copy of another target attacking creature. Now the thing with creating copies, it gets kind of complicated with Mutate. If you've mutated onto something, right, you add your abilities of a mutated creature onto whatever that other creature is. And if you copy it, that copy will have that exact same set of abilities and base stats. So that is really nice kind of synergy, potential synergy for being able to copy things that then also plays with this kind of ninjutsu theme. Baby Godzilla Ruin Reborn, also known as Polywog Symbiote. Like this is the Godzilla version of the card, and there's the normal version of the card. Anyway, this makes your mutate things cost less, and it also allows you to draw and discard whenever you cast a mutate creature. We have Kappatek Wrecker. We got to leave that in because this is one of our build arounds, right? Silver Fur Master. You got to have the rat teacher, right? So this is a lord that will pump all of your ninjas and rogues, and of course we're going to have a lot of ninjas. And it also makes ninjutsu abilities cheaper and has ninjutsu itself. Sea Dasher Octopus is maybe one of the best, if not the best, mutate creatures that were printed in Ikoria. This is really good because it allows you to draw whenever a creature deals combat damage. And in a deck with ninjutsu, where we're already going to try to have ways to allow our creatures to not be blocked, this becomes even better. It sort of has like quasi-ninjutsu in the sense that unlike a lot of other creatures or other mutate cards, maybe all of them, this is the only one that has flash. So if what you can do is when your creature is not blocked, you can mutate this on top of the creature, and then boom, hey, they are now going to be able to draw you a card when they connect with the opponent. So this just has really, really great synergy. This is an absolutely, definitely include this card. If you have it in your collection or you're willing to purchase it or whatever, this is absolutely going to be the best for, I think, what we're trying to do here with this Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles theme. Nashi Moon's Sage of Scion, of course, is another rat ninja, so we got to include it. But it does actually have a relevant ability. It says whenever it deals combat damage to a player, exile the top card of each player's library. Until end of turn, you may play one of those cards. If you cast a spell this way, pay life equal to its mana value rather than paying its mana cost. So you could cast some high mana value thing and get away with that. This is a pretty good ability. We saw this before have lots of success off of, maybe we should play this card. Now I'm thinking about it. Not Soaring Thought Thief. Dang it. It's the other one. Thief of Sanity. That's what it's a different thief. We saw that this effect be very, very good in some competitive decks, which is whenever you deal combat damage to a player, you get to start casting their cards. Thief of Sanity is slightly better because it has evasion built in a way that's consistent every turn in the form of flying, rather than Nashi kind of relying on ninjutsu in order to be able to get in. But this also does allow you to cast the spells without actually paying any mana, which is quite good. So I'm actually going to put this in the sideboard because we may want to play that card anyway. We have Satoru Umezawa, which gives all of your creatures in your hand Ninjutsu 4, which is pretty awesome. So you could even cheat in creatures for much cheaper than it would cost to cast them from hand by giving them this Ninjutsu 4 ability, and maybe even cost reducing this with Silver Fur Master. You could even have 2 Silver Fur Masters down in the field to cost reduce this down to just 1 blue and 1 black, so that's kind of great. It also has this added ability of whenever you activate a ninjutsu ability, you get to look at the top 3 of your library, put 1 into your hand, the rest on the bottom of your library, and it triggers only once each turn. So this is just a ninjutsu payoff, right? So very, very good in a ninjutsu center deck. We have Gem Razor, also known as Anguirus Armored Killer. I don't know, but this is Gem Razor, which was in the original list. And yeah, this is one of the better mutate creatures. It's a good body on its own. Trample is really awesome for mutate creatures, so it goes well because if you have a creature with trample and you mutate on top of it, you know, you're sometimes growing that creature or making it better. So it's nice if the creature you're mutating onto has trample. This ability will trigger whenever, of course, you cast mutate onto another creature or any other mutate creature casts onto it, and it allows you to destroy artifacts and enchantments. So there's a couple of cards already that destroy artifacts and enchantments. Gem Razor is by far the better one than Capitec Wrecker, but again, we're not cutting this card. It's the build around. Migratory Great Horn is one of the better mutate cards just because it's a 3-mana ramp effect that could ramp you more if you happen to mutate on top of it again. We have Parcel Beast, which is another way that you can ramp yourself, basically giving you card advantage every turn. And Auspicious Sterix. This is often in decks that are ramping into high mana cost targets. So it allows you to cheat in high mana cost things for a lot cheaper than you would otherwise be able to do. So this ability says, whenever this creature mutates, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile X permanent cards, where X is the number of times this creature has mutated. Put those permanent cards onto the battlefield. No cost whatsoever. So this is especially good in decks where you're playing super high cost creatures. So we may not get there, but this is, again, we're just looking at what are the best ninjutsu and mutate cards in the format. Now on this side, these are just good cards that either have some type of synergy that's going on here or just the best cards in the colors. So first of all, we have Suspicious Stowaway. And talking before about like high value unblockable creatures, I forget the name of the creature that we were looking at before. It's the one that exiled itself from the graveyard and made a 1/1 unblockable fish. This is better than that. It's still 2 mana to make an unblockable thing, but it also gives you huge amounts of card selection or card advantage if this flips to the nighttime side. It says when it's unblockable, first of all, and it says when it deals combat damage to a player, you can draw a card, then discard a card. And if it flips to its nightbound side, you don't have to discard the card, and it has 2 power. This is a very good creature that's unblockable. It's really nice to be able to mutate onto it and make it an even larger threat. And it also is really good for ninjutsu. So I would say this is definitely going in the deck. We're going to find a place for this for sure. Similarly, there's Tetsuka Umezawa Fugitive. This is a much more affordable card. Well, I mean, this isn't a super expensive card, but this is even more affordable. That says creatures you control with power or toughness 1 or less can't be blocked. The great thing about this is that, you know, on its own, it itself is unblockable, similar to Suspicious Stowaway, but it also enables unblockable for a ton of other creatures. So even just looking at this, these aren't necessarily all going in the deck, but even just looking at what we have a 1 power creature here, 1 there, which is already unblockable, but you know, whatever. Capitec Wrecker has 1 power. What else? Is that it? That might be it. But there's already a lot of cards we're considering that this would make unblockable. So that's another card to consider, but it depends on what else we're running. Paradise Druid is nice in a mutate deck sometimes because you really don't want, you want to be able to mutate multiple times. Say you're playing an Auspicious Sterix, you want to be able to mutate many, many times on top of it. And giving that creature hexproof essentially by making Paradise Druid the original creature you're mutating onto is a nice way to be able to ensure you can do that. Curdle of Baldur's Gate is an unblockable card we might play with. Kaito Shizuki can make unblockable ninjas, and it's just a very high value card in a lot of decks that are playing in black and green. Questing Beast, this is just here because it's a straight up good green card. I found it when, I didn't find it originally, but I did a search for can't be blocked. And I was looking in green, are there any green creatures that can't be blocked that might be relevant? And I was like, oh yeah, right, Questing Beast. It's not the fact that it can't be blocked because it's only with creatures with power 2 or less, but it's more so that it's just such a high value creature to be able to have on the board. And the fact that it has Death Touch means that it often won't be blocked. If your opponent can get away with it, they won't want to block the Questing Beast. So then you can ninjutsu onto it if you want. The fact that it has haste as well makes it really good with ninjutsu, because the downside of ninjutsu is you return a creature from the board to your hand to play the ninjutsu one. But if the creature you returned has haste, then you can replay it next turn, and it can attack in immediately, which is great. Atrata the Silencer also can't be blocked. It can serve as its own win con as well. Voracious Hydra. Now, having creatures that have trample and that can enter with counters are really nice for both mutate and ninjutsu. The counters more so with ninjutsu than the trample. So the trample's good with mutate, counters are good with ninjutsu. So why are counters good with ninjutsu? It's because if you return, like let's say I play Voracious Hydra turn 4, and it enters as a 2/2, and then I double its counters to make it up to a 4/4. Well, if I ninjutsu onto it and return it back to my hand, and now it's say turn 6, I can replay it for X4. So it enters as a 4, well, not a 4/4, it's a 4/5, and then I double the counters, and it now goes up to an 8/9. So it's a way that you can return, you can get value out of returning X cost creatures to your hand to then replay them at a later turn with much more mana open. So I have a few creatures that are able to do that. There's Voracious Hydra, there's Stonecoil Serpent, and there's Hydroid Krasis. Now, if you're playing budget and you don't have these cards already, Hydroid Krasis is maybe not where you should start because it's a very expensive card still. But Stonecoil Serpent and Voracious Hydra are going to be more affordable, and there's lots of other X-cost cards. You don't have to just stick with these cards. These are just especially good ones in the format. Any X-cost card will have this kind of synergy with ninjutsu. Thief of Sanity, I just added that. I talked about why. Sereth the Viper's Fang is great because it adds Death Touch to creatures, which makes them harder to block. And it can also give untapped creatures hexproof, which we talked about why that's good with mutate. So that's a card that's worth considering. Okay, those are the good cards that I've looked at. So what I would do now and what I'm going to do is I'm going to start to construct a deck by starting with like the core of, what is my deck's game plan, how is it trying to win, and what are the best cards I'm looking at, and then kind of fill it out from there and see what I have. So I'm going to go away, make a list, and we're going to see what I come up with. All right, this is just kind of a halfway point break. I'm going to get to the final list in just a second, but I wanted to show a part of this process because I think it might be illuminating as far as deck building goes. This is sort of a flushed out what I've come up with yet. This is a maybe card, very heavy maybe card, but otherwise this is what I'm seriously considering. Notice here that I have 38 out of 60 cards. Assuming that we're playing around 24 lands, that means I need to cut a couple. However, I'm noticing that trying to look at what my game plan is. Do I have all my bases covered? And I have really good card draw value engine. I have really good value cards. I have really good card draw engines. I've got some okay removal going on, but I think I need a little bit better removal. So what I'm doing is I'm going to look for, I realize that what would be really good right now and combo off really well with a lot of what's going on is a creature that when it enters the battlefield can somehow remove a thing. There are a few creatures that do that, like, for example, Hostage Taker is one of my favorites, that when it enters, you can exile another creature until it leaves, and then you may cast that spell. So it kind of plays into the theme of playing around with what your opponent has. But if I want to kind of know more generally, what are other creatures that might do that, I can look enter battlefield, destroy, and I specifically want to know, I'm looking both what's in my card collection and not, and I'm looking for creatures. You could do this on Gatherer as well. A lot of these down in the lower CMCs, I just know through experience, are going to be things that only destroy a thing if it was dealt damage. Usually the things that just like flat out unconditional removal when it enters are going to be up at 4 CMC or higher. So there's like Ravenous Chupacabra, Cavalier of Night, which allows you to sack a thing. You can't really read that. It allows you to sack a thing and then return a thing, and anyway, so that might be one way to do it, but Chupacabra was one I had in mind, and I'm just like, what else might be out there? So I'm considering between Hostage Taker and Ravenous Chupacabra. I think Hostage Taker is maybe more fun for this particular deck. The idea of being able to cast a lot of your opponent's things, I think, is kind of a fun idea, so maybe we'll go with that, but just thought I would peep in here in a little bit before we get to the actual final list. All right, and here's the final list that I came up with. I'll post a link in the description down below to this list. Sort of, again, trying to center it around this theme of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and see if we can't make this more competitive and more fun to play for that reason. So, Suspicious Stowaway, 4 of. We talked about why this was so good. I also noticed that it has the Rogue type, at least when it's on its Daybound side, so it will get buffed by Silver Fur Master, which is not nothing. We're splitting the difference to Capitech Wrecker and 2 Gemrazor. Gemrazor is the better card. I'm assuming that Taylor has a couple of Gemrazor themselves because it's in their original list. So good. You don't need to buy any new ones. You can use some Ninja Turtles instead. But you really don't need more than 4 of these effects in most situations against most decks. Unless there's really a lot of artifacts or enchantments in the format that matter, I don't think we need more than 4. So I split the difference here between Kappa Wrecker and Gem Razor. We have 2 Silver for Master. Now, when to play 4 of, when to play 2 of. You want to play 4 of a card, and I'm just going to give a really brief overview because this is a huge topic, but you want to play 4 of a card when you really, it's like really good card, and you don't mind seeing multiples. You want to play 3 of when you don't mind seeing multiples, but you really don't want to see them in your opening hand, or you don't want to draw into them too consistently. 2 of is when you want to be able to get to it, but you definitely never want to have, a multiple. And 1 of is like when there's just no situation in hell that you're ever going to want a multiple in the course of a game, and you won't mind at all if you never draw into it. So we're playing 2 of because we don't really need multiples of this card. It would be cool to reduce the ninjutsu cost by an additional 1, but that's only really relevant in our deck for Satoru Umezawa, and I don't think it's going to be big enough to make a difference. We also don't have too many things that have these types. There's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, if we count the fact that these can make ninjas, 9, 10, 11. Unfortunately, Thief of Sanity does not have the rogue type, which I think is stupid, but it doesn't. So 11, this is a pirate, not a thief, so still 11. It's 11 cards that have the appropriate type to be buffed by Silver for a Master. Otherwise, we might play more of him because that would be really nice to have a Lord. The good thing is that oftentimes I think we're going to be wanting to mutate on top of, we're going to be wanting to mutate onto some of our rogues and ninjas. So they might retain the rogue or ninja type in that case and then receive the buff from Silver for a Master. So that might be an advantage there. But this is one that, you might cut for something else. It's really not needed for the deck. It's mostly flavor in order to be, I can't think of his name. I want to call him Shredder. It's not Shredder. Oh my God, why can't I think of his name? Sensei, the Rat Sensei. I have to look it up now. Rat Sensei, TMNT. Splinter. Oh my God, I feel like I am not actually a millennial when I am. Anyway, okay, so we could cut that. Sea Dasher Octopus. This is so excellent, so excellent. I think I've already talked about why. Kaito Shizuki is a card that you'll see in decks that aren't even playing with ninjutsu, but it gets even better then. It's really nice card value engine, so it's great, and then it can create these unblockable ninjas, which is obviously really good for us. Satoru Umezawa, definitely for the ninjutsu payoff. We are running 3 Thief of Sanity. I ended up cutting the other rat because this was just the better card, I think, in most situations, and we really didn't need more than 3 copies of this effect. So we're playing with this card. And the cool thing is that with Satoru Umezawa, if this gets ninjutsu off of that, like you cast it onto an unblocked creature, the problem with Thief of Sanity is that you have to be able to untap with it. You cast it, it has Summoning Sickness, it is one of your most primo removal targets, and it will often just be you spent 3 mana and your opponent removed it. And it's pretty easy to kill. They can kill it with 1 or 2 mana with a lot of different cards. So usually you lose tempo by playing Thief of Sanity because it'll just get killed, and you won't be able to untap with it on your turn. However, playing it with ninjutsu is more likely to guarantee that you're going to get at least one of its, dealing combat damage to players effects and allow you to cast spells from the top of their library. So this is a really good inclusion in a deck that plays Satoru Umezawa. We have 3 Migratory Greathorn to help us ramp. We could do without this because there's not a ton that we're needing to ramp into. Really what we're ramping into is Hydroid Krasis and Hostage Taker. I'll get to Hostage Taker in a second. Obvious why Hydroid Krasis you need to ramp into, but I guess I'll get to it now. Hostage Taker, what is this card? When it enters, it exiles a creature or artifact until it leaves the battlefield, and then you may cast that card for as long as it remains exiled. With Hostage Taker, you really, 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 really want to be able to cast the creature or artifact that you take the same turn if possible. It's not always possible. You don't always need to do it the same turn, but if possible, that's good. So having ramp with Hostage Taker is great because you don't want to have to cast this turn 4. It's better to cast this much later when you have like 7 or 8 mana. So being able to ramp up to it, that's why I say this is a ramp target. Then you get maximum value out of it. Hydroid Krasis, obviously why we're ramping into it. It is another card draw and value engine. So looking at the card draw cards in our deck before we even get to Colossal Sky Turtle, we have 4 Hydroid Krasis, 4 Sea Dasher Octopus, 2 Kaito Shizuki, and 3 Satoru Umezawa. I think that's 13 so far. And then 4 Suspicious Stowaway. That's 17. This is one of the things with a lot of new players is you want to make sure that you have good card draw. Either just like ways to dig deeper in your deck. It doesn't have to necessarily be, card advantage, but you have to be able to get deeper into your deck somehow. We have 17 ways, not including Thief of Sanity, which is a form of card draw, so that's 20, and Hostage Taker, which is a form of card advantage, so that's 23 card advantage cards in our deck. And that'll make this deck just like hum. And then finally, we have Colossal Sky Turtle. I thought about this card because I was like, wait a minute, are there any turtles we should play? I think you should probably play Fading Hope instead, but just because we're making a competitive deck doesn't mean that we can't have fun. So this is the better competitive card because it's only 1 mana to return a creature to your hand instead of 2. And I think in this deck, that's the better card. It also allows you to scry 1 a lot of the time when you do that. But let me talk about first why we have Bounce in the deck at all before I get into Colossal Sky Turtle. Bounce is in this deck because being able to return both ninjutsu cards to your hand and being able to return mutate cards to your hand is really good. If you've mutated a bunch of stuff onto the same creature, then if you bounce that creature back to your hand, say in response to them trying to remove it, you get all of those cards back in your hand. So if a board wipe is coming, or they're trying to spot remove a creature, or even just you want to replay them again for their mutate effects or their enter the battlefield abilities, then Fading Hope is so good value. And it also can act as removal, of course, right? So you can hit your opponent's things. It could remove a key blocker, allowing you to get in for your ninjutsu stuff. So yeah, really, really good. Bounce really, really good in this deck. Fading Hope is one of the better ways that you can do that in Explorer. However, we're playing Colossal Sky Turtle because it's a turtle, and it is still really good. It's still a very, very good card. We're not going to cast it probably ever in this deck for 7 mana, although we could because we are ramping. It's just not a good enough body to justify that a lot of the time. However, its 2 channel abilities are really what matters. It can allow you to return a target creature to its owner's hand. That could be yours or theirs for 1 in a blue, so slightly more expensive than Fading Hope, which does matter. But you still get that great combos that I'm talking about. And it has the added value of this modality. You can also spend 2 and a green to channel it and get a target creature card, or target card, not necessarily creature card, from your graveyard to your hand. So some of the ways you might use this is you can fix your colors or your mana base by getting a land back from your graveyard, say a Fabled Passage that you sacrificed before. Obviously, you can get a creature back that's been killed or a spell that you've cast to remove a thing. Now, I just realized we actually are not playing any spells. These are all creatures somehow because we've got so much removal and other things going on that's creature-based. So that means, I didn't even think about this until just now, but we can play a companion, which I think are legal in this format. We can play, there's a few different companions we could play. We could play Umori the Collector, which says that its restriction is each non-land card in your starting deck shares a card type, which they're all creatures, so it does. I think there's one other creature-based one. Now this is all them being the same type. Maybe that's the one I was thinking of. Let me just triple check here. Yeah, so if you wanted to, we just happen to have a deck where we can have this as our companion. Oh no, never mind. We're running 2 planeswalkers. So I don't know. Is this better? The benefit of this as a companion is, it's card advantage. And also, it makes all of your creatures cheaper. So I don't know. Does this reduce the mutate cost? I'm not actually sure. So I don't know. Do you play Umori over Kaito here? I'm not sure. But let's just remove it for now, and we're going to go with this is the list. Here's some other things that you might consider, some alternatives that I didn't talk about before. Let me find them. Baron Tolarian Archmage. This is a really interesting card for this deck. I talked about the good potential with bounce. Now, this can't happen at instant speed, so this is not a type of bounce you can use to protect your creatures from a board wipe or spot removal, but you can return creatures in order to get their ETB triggers again or their ninjutsu effects again or whatever, or to be able to get in as an unblockable, yada, yada, yada. And it gives you the added value that at the beginning of your end step, if a permanent was put into your hand from the battlefield this turn, draw a card. So any ninjutsu thing that you do, if this is on the field, that'll end up drawing you a card at your end step, which is really awesome added value in a ninjutsu deck. We already had enough card draw engines that we didn't need to play this, but if you had this in your collection instead of some of the other card draw cards, like say Sea Dasher Octopus, you might consider playing a Baron or two. I wouldn't do more than 2 in this particular deck, because seeing more than 1 in a game is probably never going to be good. And you definitely can't play more than 1 because he's a legendary creature. But yeah, that's the deck. And I'm just going to take a quick scroll through the land base. This will be in the deck list. But we have a lot of shock lands that can enter untapped if you pay 2 life. And we do have a little bit of these check lands that make sure you have 2 or more lands and they can enter untapped. We have 3 Zaggoth Triomes, just because that's all I have crafted, but you could absolutely do with 4 in this deck. And, you know, maybe you want to cycle it, maybe it just helps you color fix, and then 4 Fabled Passage. Okay, on to the next deck. And here's our second list, still in Arena, because this actually is a standard list, so I can show it to you here, as is the next deck following this one as well. I'm not going to completely redesign this deck like I did the last one. I'm just going to give some critiques and some thoughts, and then maybe even pick out a few particular cards. But first of all, this is a Dollhouse of Horrors build around by Quite Queer. Posted this to the Magic the Gathering Arena. Well, they posted it a few places, but one of them is the MTG deck building subreddit. So that's where I found this list, and they gave me permission, as did all the people today, to upload it. Anyway, what's it doing? It's centered around Dollhouse of Horrors. It's 5 mana artifact, which has the ability of pay 1 and tap, exile a creature card from your graveyard. Then you get to create a token that's a copy of the exiled card, except it's a 0/0 construct that gets +1/+1 for each other construct. And it has haste, which is not nothing. So you really want to do this on cards that have abilities. Now, the particular thing that they're doing is doing this with a mill strategy, filling their graveyard, which is good for Dollhouse anyway, and then getting value out of being able to fill their yard by having Dreadhound ping the opponent in the face every time you end up milling a creature. And there are a lot of creatures in the deck. Not all creatures, but most creatures. That's the general strategy. You have a lot of cards like Moldegraph Millipede, which that help you to mill, but they could also be targets for Dollhouse. So almost all the creatures that are in this deck are really good targets for Dollhouse. So there's a lot of really good synergy that's going on here that looks like it makes this deck really fun. I'm unfortunately not going to get to play with it because I am like basically out of rares and I can't really craft Dollhouse right now. I can craft like 1, and this deck really needs 4 to make it do its thing. But I am going to offer some critique here and some advice. So starting off, just the very first thing I noticed is the mana base. I noticed there's 10 Swamp, 10 Forest, and 4 Deathcap Glade. So I think you probably want more mana fixing than this. You do have, there is some other, here we go. There's 4 Reclusive Taxidermist, which will help to mana fix, assuming you have green and you're trying to fix for black, but it doesn't help you the other way around, right? And also if it gets removed, then you might be screwed if that was your whole mana fixing strategy. So this is not quite enough of the numbers of colors that you want in order to be able to do your thing. Now, that said, the only double-pipped card that we have is Meathook Massacre. That's a pretty important one, but it is the only one. I mean, we're probably not casting Dreadhound from hand. We're probably not wanting to. We're probably wanting to cast it from the graveyard with Dollhouse of Horrors. So the fact that that's double-pipped black does not matter as much as Meathook Massacre does. So that means that we don't need to go as hardcore into color fixing in this deck as we might need to in others. However, it's still pretty important. We really would like to cast this turn 1 if we can. We'd really like to cast these cards turn 2 if we can as well. So, you know, I would just take a look at some of the other dual lands. What I do when I'm looking for the good dual lands is I go, you know, multicolored land with the 2 colors selected, and sometimes I'll even go rare, right? And that'll show me only the good ones because the good ones always tend to be rare. So yeah, so you might think of some of those dual lands. I think there's a couple here that aren't showing that are legal in the format. The next thing I notice is that this has a lack of removal again. We do have 2 Infernal Grasp and 2 Meathook Massacre, but otherwise we're really short on removal. I think maybe there was 1 other conditional removal. I mean, we can like exile stuff from yards. Yeah, so we can exile stuff from our opponent's yards sometimes. But otherwise, we don't have a lot of ways to have removal. Meathook Massacre, very good removal. I think you could run 3, maybe even 4, especially in this deck, because this is the kind of strategy where you don't need a wide board. You don't need like this creature's ability and that creature on this field at the same time. You want 1 creature's ability. And hey, if your creatures die, you can just get them back, right? Assuming you have a Dollhouse of Horrors, then you can just get them back onto the field. So I might even go up to 4 Meathook Massacre. It's just so good, especially in this really aggressive meta. This will help you to stabilize like all of the time. And you could do with more Infernal Grasp for that matter too. If you wanted this to be your spot removal spell, then going up to 4 of this and 4 of that might be enough, but I think we can do better. We have Dollhouse of Horrors, which we can have create a token that will enter the battlefield and trigger an enter the battlefield ability. So again, I'm going to look and see if there are any enter battlefield, destroy, or exile effects that are on creatures in particular. And I don't want just rares here. So let's take a look here real quick together and see if we can't find any good ones. Or fight is another one that could be. So Titan of Industry, that's actually an interesting thought to play with Dollhouse of Horrors. Like maybe just a 1 of. It's not bad to cast from hand, of course. It only removes artifacts and enchantments. It's not going to remove a creature, right, on its own. But it's worth considering in this deck if you have it. Let's look for Enter Fight and see what good cards we have. Tavalar's Huntmaster does not fight when it enters. It has to flip tonight, and then you pay 4 for it. So maybe not the best one. Although, if you're doing this as a Dollhouse target, it's kind of nice because you've paid 1 mana, you get a 1/1 probably, but you also get 2 2/2s. I don't think that's good enough value, and it can never flip if you've done it with the Dollhouse of Horrors. So I don't think that's really what we're looking for. Let's see, Enter Exile. There's going to be stuff that exiles from graveyards when it enters. Okay, I had a look-see. There aren't a lot of really great ETB removals. The best I could find are, and maybe I'm forgetting some, but our Cemetery Desecrator. Sorry that my face is above the card here. So that's one that can remove a thing when it enters. Gelatinous Cube can remove a thing. It can exile it, and then you can make it go to their graveyard. So that's something that you could pay 1 with Dollhouse of Horrors. Get it onto the field, use its ability, and remove a thing. Acquisitions Expert is another kind of ETB removal that you might think about because it can hit their hand when it enters. It's less good value than like destroying a creature that's on the field, but we're still only paying 1 mana if we're doing this from the yard, and it's nice to play on turn 2 anyway, so this is actually kind of a really good thought for the deck. But before I go crazy suggesting more cards, let me just get back to the critique. So yeah, so far I've talked about mana base removal. The third thing is card quality. Some of these cards don't have super high card quality. So like Undead Butler plays into the strategy because it helps get your graveyard started, assuming you're casting this on turn 2. And when it dies, you can return a card from your graveyard to your hand. But in my experience, Undead Butler, even in decks that really have lots of graveyard shenanigans going, it's just not pulling enough of its weight compared to a lot of other 2-drops. Like, it'd be better for you to cut all 4 of these and play 2 Infernal Grasp and 2 Meathook Massacre. You have enough other mill stuff going on that you probably would not even miss this card, and the added removal would actually make a very big difference in your win rate, would be my guess. And then finally, the thing that is most missing in this deck is card draw kind of value selection engine. When you're doing graveyard shenanigans, you need less of that because you can take advantage of your graveyard in lots of ways. This deck, however, still needs that because it's very critical that we need to find and play our Dollhouse of Horrors. When you're playing 4 copies, it's more likely that you're going to have it in your opening hand or draw into it, but it's not guaranteed, right? And you really want it. And if it gets removed, you want a second one or a way to get it back. So far, look at the list, there really isn't any kind of card draw or kind of like a card advantage engine that's going on in the deck, or even just card draw spells. So that would be something that would need to be added as well. So I'm going to go and find some specific card recommendations and talk about them. Oh, and you know what? I just noticed that this deck is supposed to be rotation proof, so I'm going to specifically look for rotation proof cards, which means no Gelatinous Cube, no Acquisition Expert. Unfortunately, those are the 2 best of those cards that I pulled out. So here are a few cards that you might consider including. First of all, we have Cemetery Desecrator, which, as I said before, is a way to get some sort of form of removal off of a creature ETB trigger. Otherwise, I think it's kind of bad to cast from hand, but your yard will be filled enough that it will do something relevant some of the time. I'm not sure that 6 mana for a 4/4 menace that removes a thing is a good use of that 6 mana, but it's not bad off of a Dollhouse of Horrors trigger. So what I would suggest is maybe play 1, maybe 2 of these if you wanted to include it. Reckoner's Bargain, as I said, that there is really a lack of card draw going on, or just kind of card advantage stuff happening. So this is one way to do that. You can sacrifice an artifact or creature and gain life equal to the sacrifice permanent's mana value, and then draw 2 cards. So you don't have to actually sacrifice. That's Well, you do have to actually sacrifice, but it doesn't have to be a big thing because that's just for the life gain, right? So it's the cards that matter, and there are some decent sacrifice targets already. Or you can hold this up as an instant speed in response to them trying to remove something. Shigeki, this is a card value engine, really, because you can channel him in order to return X non-legendary creature cards from your graveyard to your hand. Importantly, this is really important for graveyard decks that have a build-around card, like in this case you have this artifact, is if you're going to be milling yourself anyway, then this can help you get to that key build-around card. So you have a plan of milling it and somehow returning it to your hand. Shigeki is one way you can do that. That's a very high value card. The other one is the turtle that we just looked at before with the other list, Colossal Sky Turtle. So you may think of that as well. This is going to go particularly well if you add Slogurk to this. And if you have not seen the Slogurk control decks, then you might not know how powerful this combo of cards is. But these cards really do well together. You don't even have to play all three together. But in this case, they would be nice. You know what? I realize you can't see that. So let me move them all over here so you can see these cards a little bit better here. So I'm talking about Colossal Sky Turtle, Shigeki, and Slogurk. So let's take a look at what these cards might do if you wanted to go into blue. This would also give you more options for card draw. So you could play, say, Memory Deluge, which is the best thing that you can play really right now for card draw, and especially for card selection, so that you can get up to that 7 mana flashback and really dig deep for your Dollhouse of Horrors. It's really nice to have this card if you're in blue. But let's just take a look at these cards. So Slogurk, when a land enters when a land is put into a graveyard, you put a counter on Slogurk. So you have a lot of mill. This is going to be putting counters on him like crazy. And then if you want, you can remove 3 of those counters to return Slogurk to your hand, so that if it's being targeted, for example, then you can do that. When he leaves the battlefield for any reason, including him being returned to your hand, then you can return up to 3 target land cards from your graveyard to your hand. So there's this really nice loop there. You typically add in lands that do stuff. So let's take a look again at rare and mythic rare. I don't even know if there are mythic rare right now. Lands, so like Odawara is a card that you'd have in order to bounce something, and then you can recurse it back to your hand by having Slogurk leave the battlefield, for example. Takenuma is a card that I would absolutely recommend in your deck anyway, and I totally forgot to put it on this list. But yeah, this goes really well in your deck because it allows you to mill, first of all, and then you can return a creature or planeswalker from your graveyard to your hand. So it's not going to get back the Dollhouse of Horrors since it's an artifact, but it will get back a lot of your other high-value creatures if you need it. But if you're playing with Slogurk, then that's even better. You can return Takenuma to your hand from your graveyard, which, you cycled it before, and you can keep this loop going infinitely. Boseiju to remove an artifact. So, you use these utility lands, essentially, and you get them back with Slogurk. If you have Shigeki and Colossal Sky Turtle, and it also works really well with Slogurk, if it's not with Colossal Sky Turtle, you spend Shigeki to channel him and return X target non-legendary cards from your graveyard to your hand. So you're not going to actually return Slogurk. I just realize that, but Colossal Sky Turtle will return Slogurk, and Shigeki can return Colossal Sky Turtle. So it is nice in the whole package, right? But if you don't play in blue at all, and you just want to say, okay, I'm going to keep my colors to be Golgari, black-green, you don't want to play in blue, I would still say play Shigeki, because it's a way that you can get your Dollhouse back from your yard when you inevitably end up milling it or it gets destroyed by your opponent, and that'll save you a lot of the time. But also, it can get even more cards back than that. It also helps you ramp, so there's a lot of reasons to play it, and worst come to worst, you're just milling it into your graveyard, and so it adds to your, essentially your undergrowth value, the number of creatures that you have in your yard for things like Moldegraft Millipede or for triggering Dreadhound, right? So it's a nice additional creature to play. Colossal Sky Turtle, though, maybe even if you're not in blue, play it with Shigeki, because there's this infinite looping ability where you play Shigeki, return Colossal Sky Turtle, and one other card you wanted back from your yard. Then you play Colossal Sky Turtle to return Shigeki, and you still are up 1 card. You've spent a lot of mana to do that, but you're up 1 card. And that's really nice. Or maybe even more cards than that. You're maybe up more than 1 card if you spent more than, let's see, what is it? If you spent more than 6 mana on Shigeki. If you spend like 8 mana, then you're up 2 cards. So anyway, nice loop, maybe even if you're not playing in blue. But these are some cards I would consider from there. So I talked about Takenuma. Let's take a look at... Oh my god, it's getting hard to see all the cards over here. Talked about Cemetery Desecrator. So Graveyard Trespasser. This is a card that has a potentially relevant ETB trigger. It's bad with Dollhouse because it can never flip as a copy. Copies never are able to flip, like dual-face modal cards can't flip. But it's just a very high value card in the format, so it feels really nice to cast it on turn 3 and be able to do something with it. Worst come to worst, you could even exile creatures from your own library in order to ping their face. I mean, you're already on a pingy kind of slow strategy in that way. So this kind of plays into that if you're just like going for ways to chip them for 1. And because you're filling your yard, you'll always have creatures to exile in order to ping them if you want. So those are the cards that I thought that you might consider for shoring up some of the weaknesses of the deck. In addition to the additional removal that I talked about, at least 2 additional spot removal, at least 2 additional Meat Hook Massacre, if not more removal, is what I would suggest. Okay, a couple of other things about the deck. Dryad's Revival, I would get rid of this card. It's so high cost. I understand the reasoning for it being here, because the idea is you'll mill it, and then you get value out of it being in your graveyard by, paying for its flashback cost. Again, another great reason to be in blue, because sometimes the best way to play Memory Deluge is from your yard. So this is a much better flashback card. But anyway, I understand the reason that it's here. It's just so expensive for what it actually does. Even if you're just spending it as a 3-mana sorcery, oftentimes it's not very good. Much rather play Groom Shrieker, which basically does the same thing, except for it also acts as a 2/1 body with Menace, and it helps fill your yard if you happened to mill it. Now, if it dies, it gets exiled, it doesn't fill your yard, but we don't care so much about that in the deck. So I would say get rid of Dryad's Revival. And then otherwise, on the value train, Reclusive Taxidermist, I am on the fence about, because on its face in your deck, it's very often going to be a 2-mana 4/4, which seems like good value, which can also tap for 1 mana of any color. But the bummer is that it's never going to be a 2-mana 4/4 on turn 2, which is where that would matter the most. If you could get a 2-mana 4/4 on turn 2, absolutely play it. But in your deck, you're literally never going to be able to make that happen. You do not have a 1-drop that can mill you for that much. And especially guaranteeing that they're all going to be creatures, it's not going to happen. So, this might come down on turn 4 as a 2-mana 4/4, which is still good, but it's not as good as maybe some other cards you could play. So I'm on the fence about this one. The fact that it color fixes is kind of saving it. Again, I would say no Undead Butler. Cemetery Tampering. I think this is good because it mills you every turn. And it's especially good because it can, hide away and allow you to play expensive cards like Dreadhound. So maybe even if you play Colossal Sky Turtle, then you're casting this as a 6/5, off of the hideaway ability. Crawling Infestations. This is a card I experimented with in a deck that was getting much more value out of Crawling Infestations than this one, and I ended up cutting it because it just was not good enough. I mean, it's nice that it's every turn mill, but honestly, you don't need every turn mill in order to make a deck like this happen. So I'm not sure that this is a card that you need to run. Even though you're only playing one of, it's kind of nice that it adds these chumpers potentially every turn. Not always, but potentially it adds a chumper every turn, maybe even more than one because you have other cards that are going to be milling you. But I just found that it often wasn't high enough value for me. So I don't know. I'm on the fence about that one, but I would say maybe not quite high enough value. Eccentric Farmer. This is not very good in this deck. Again, it's just a creature that mills you for 3. And again, you want as many creatures that will mill you in some fashion because you want to have lots of creatures. If your win con is Dreadhound and Dollhouse of Horrors, then yeah, you want a lot of creatures. So creatures that mill you makes a lot of sense. I understand why it's here. I think this makes even more sense if you were playing with the Colossal Sky Turtle Slogurk Shigeki thing with lots of utility lands, because now this is getting back utility lands. Potentially, when it's entering the field. Otherwise, if you're casting this on, say, turn 5 or 6, it just feels really bad, I think, a lot of the time to be playing it. So, I don't know. I'm on the fence about this one as well. But I would say definitely Undead Butler probably is not carrying its weight. And what was the other one? Oh, yeah, Dryad's Revival. Those are the things that I would cut for some of these other cards, if not some of those other cards that I mentioned. All right, on to the next deck. Actually, hold up. Not onto the next deck. I forgot. There's a couple of other things I wanted to show off concerning this deck. Some cards that are coming out. Since this is a rotation-proof list, it looks like to me, that's the point. I want to look at some cards that might help improve this that are going to be coming up in rotation. So there's Eerie Soul Tender, which when it enters mills 3. So it has that great thing going on for it. But you can also pay 5 and exile it from the yard to return another target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Now, I would not suggest this over some of the other cards that I suggested for returning stuff from the yard, like Shigeki Wait, no, yeah, Shigeki. I would rather play that and also the turtle than Eerie Soul Tender. But if you were going for more budget friendly, then this would be an option. Cruelty of Grix, absolutely. Oh, this goes so well in this deck. Target opponent reveals their hand, you choose a creature or planeswalker from it, and they have to discard it. Then you can search your library for a card, any card, put that card into your hand, and you lose 3 life. And then finally, put target creature card from a graveyard, not necessarily yours, onto the battlefield under your control. This is very similar to, I want to say Elspeth Conquers Death. That's not the card. Oh God, what's that card from Dominion? Oh, not Dominion, Dominaria. That's why I can't find it. It's definitely Dominaria. Here we go. Eldest Reborn. That's what I was thinking of. Each opponent, let's see if I can't pull this up in a way that you can see it. So here's the card I was looking for. Each opponent sacrifices a creature. Each opponent discards a card. Put a creature or planeswalker from a graveyard under the battlefield under your control. So kind of similar to that. And that was a very, very powerful card in that standard format. This is probably going to be as well. And it plays super well into your themes because it's removal, which I told you your deck was short on, but also because it can return a card from your graveyard to the field, which is going to get you value out of your graveyard. The other ones you might be looking at are Urborg Lurgoyf, which is a mouthful to say. It's a 2 mana, probably 3 mana in your deck that will mill you 3 when it enters, if you kick it for 3 mana. But its power is equal to the number of creatures in your graveyard, and its toughness is equal to that +1. So this is potentially a very big creature. Really, really awesome card for your deck. I highly recommend playing with this if you can get your hands on it. This is a maybe card. I don't think this is quite as strong as the other ones, but its power is equal to the number of lands in your graveyard, so it's another one of those kinds of effects for you. And at the beginning of your upkeep, you can look at the top card of your library and you may choose to put that card into your graveyard. So that's like a mill every turn. You can also pay 2, sack a land, and gain 2 life. I'm not sure if you're ever going to want to do that, but this is a card worth considering if you're looking for a more budget-friendly version of that. Anyway, thank you so much for being willing to have your deck featured. Let's go on to the next one. All right, and for the final list of today, we have a blue and red standard tempo list, which is near and dear to my heart. If you're a fan of the channel, you know I like tempo, specifically blue-red tempo. I came up with a list that was pretty dang good in the meta a couple few sets ago, far enough ago that all those cards are rotated out. But in any case, you know that I love tempo. So this is a deck posted by Smooth Criminal 2299 to the Magic deck building subreddit, and they again gave me permission to critique the deck and feature it on the channel. Yeah, I'm excited. This is not only a rotation-proof list, it's also post-rotation. So it includes cards in here that are not yet in standard, but will be very, very soon, like Hadi Jin, which is by far the best new tempo deck. So yeah, absolutely amazing. Lots of people are brewing around with this. So let's take a look at this deck and see what's up. So first of all, if you're kind of newish to Magic, or even just maybe you're not new to Magic, but you don't know exactly what a tempo deck is. So first of all, there's multiple things that people might mean when they say tempo. There's the concept of tempo, and then there's the deck archetype of tempo. And although they're related, they're 2 different ideas. So right now we're talking about the deck archetype. It's a deck strategy, sort of like control or aggro. In fact, tempo, a lot of people think about it as a combination of both aggro and control. I think about it in a different way, but that's a good way to kind of get your mind around what this is trying to do. So the key thing with tempo is that you want to control the pace of the game, control everything that happens. You want to be doing more with your mana, and as a consequence, you often will have trouble keeping up in card advantage because of that, because you're like spending your cards, say, on bounce, or something like that, and it's not getting you that same value as, say, a control deck has. So you need to win quickly, which is why tempo is also aggressive. Sometimes you can step back into that control role if you're playing against a more aggressive list, but most of the time you want to be as aggressive as possible. Tempo typically does this by having low cost but high threatening creatures that are on the board, and then protecting those creatures and also removing their opponent's things or interfering with them via counterspells or stuff like that. In this particular list, we're not really doing a heck of a lot of counterspelling. We have a little bit. We have 3 Spell Pierce and 4 Make Disappear, but otherwise our interaction with our opponent is in the form of burn. So we have 3 Play with Fire, 4 Lightning Strike, 4 Kami's Flame, and I think that's it. Well, burn down the house. And that's mostly going to be hitting creatures, and that's an important thing to just start off understanding this list, is that sometimes you will actually spend your spells to hit your opponent's face. Maybe you want to scry with Play with Fire, or, maybe they're close enough to lethal that you can lightning strike their face. But a lot of the time in tempo, this is going to be hitting creatures or planeswalkers, and it's going to be spent as removal. So it's important to understand that when trying to understand, how is this deck operating. Another thing I'm going to mention right off the bat is that there were actually 59 cards in this list. So I think that, they had just written up the list. They hadn't actually played with it yet, right? So because these cards aren't in standard yet. So I went ahead and did them the favor of adding an island. A pro deck building tip is that, you'd be surprised how often cutting a card and adding a land actually makes your deck much more consistent. So before there were 22 lands in the deck, now there are 23. I think that this deck or a version of it could get away with playing 22, but I do think that it could also be better playing 23. Okay, let's get into the deck critique here. First thing I noticed is that there are not enough creature threats. That's very important for tempo, especially cheap creature threats. And particularly, you want to see something on turn 1 if you can. Right now, there is an amazing card for this deck, and what Smooth Criminal is trying to do with it in particular that would go very well in it. So let's talk about what Smooth Criminal's particular take on this deck is. There's an interaction here between Haughty Djinn and Ledger Shredder that they're trying to take advantage of. So Haughty Djinn, I told you, this is the best new tempo card. It might be even the best tempo card. I don't know how you would exactly compare all the cards to say that, but it's very good. It's a 3-mana creature with some amount of power and 4 toughness and flying, and its power is equal to the number of instant and sorcery cards in your graveyard, and it makes all of your instants and sorceries cheaper. This is really, really good as a top-end kind of finisher. Well, they say top-end. Usually in tempo, your top-end is at 3 mana. So, or maybe 4 if you're pushing it. Rarely at 5 unless it's a really slow meta or a really controlling meta and you need to be able to survive into the late game. Right now, we're in a really aggressive meta, so your top end in tempo should be 3. And by top end, I mean not only the most expensive cards that you're casting, but also your game-finishing cards. And Haughty Djinn plays that role well, because sometimes you can play him on turn 4 or 5, and his power will be even better than 3. Like already, if he were just a 3/4 flyer for 3 mana, that's huge value. And he has a cost reduction effect. That's amazing. So if you can get him to even more than that, which I think this deck is capable of, then you're going to be sitting pretty. Then there's this interaction with Ledger Shredder, which says whenever a player casts their second spell each turn, Ledger Shredder connives. So connive is the effect that allows you to draw a card and then discard a card whenever it connives. And if you discard a card that's not a land, then the creature gets +1/+1. So this is a way that Ledger Shredder can grow to be a threat in its own right, which is a very important thing in tempo, is your creatures either have to be really, really, really hyper-aggressive creatures, or they have to be able to grow as the game goes on. Both Ledger Shredder and Haughty Djinn does that. Let's take a look at the other only creature that they're running in the deck, which is Sphinx of Clear Skies. This is a 5-mana 5/5 with flying and ward 2. And it has this domain effect, which says that basically whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you reveal the top X cards, where X is equal to your the number of basic land types among lands you control. In this deck, that's only ever really going to be 2 basic land types, okay? And then the opponent separates those cards into 2 piles. These are 2 cards. They're picking one to go in one pile and one to go in the other. And then you get to put one of those in your hand and the other into your graveyard. So let's talk about how this operates in the tempo deck and specifically around the kinds of synergies that they're going for. So this does ostensibly fill your yard with spells, but if it's good to fill your yard with spells and your opponent has any other option, they won't do that. So this is always getting the worst of the top 2 cards on your deck, and that's only if it actually connects for damage. Also, this is a 5-mana spell, and it's not doing 5 mana worth of value, at least not in a tempo deck. In a tempo deck, all of your plays, you want to be incredibly tempo positive, which I'm talking about the concept of tempo. And again, that's maybe a whole other video in itself. But Sphinx of Clear Skies is not providing enough tempo value on its own, and I anticipate that this will not be played in tempo decks. I'm not sure what deck this gets played in. Maybe in a deck that can really turn on Domain, it has better value. But I don't think that this is doing what we want it to do. So really, we're only playing 6 total creatures in this deck, creature threats, and creature threats are very, very important to tempo. Some of the reasons why we want creature threats, what we're really missing is we're missing more in the 2-mana section and more in the 1-mana section. And part of the reason we want those is that they will eat spot removal from our opponent, which is good because it clears the way for better cards like Haughty Djinn. and because it allows us to get in for early damage. That early damage is really, really significant. Really often, your 1 and 2 mana spells and tempo will be doing like an outsized portion of the damage to your opponent, and then these big cards will just come in to present inevitability. So unless they can remove it, then you're fine. And as long as you're able to protect it, then they can't remove it. And eventually you're going to get in with 1 hit, and that's all you need, or maybe 2 hits, and then they're dead, right? But that is only possible. You can only really threaten them and put them into that must respond to situation where they have to respond to Hadi Djinn or die. You can only do that if you've been able to do enough damage to them in the early game. So really, creatures are good. And now you could cast these burn spells at their face in order to get them down, but it's bad. If you cast this at your opponent's face, that's card disadvantage. You've lost a card, and they haven't lost a card in return. That's why in tempo, you want to be spending, well, there's multiple reasons why, but one of the reasons why in tempo, you want to be spending these spells to remove creatures and not to go at your opponent's face until you're close to finishing the game, generally speaking. So you can't count all of these burn spells as going at the opponent's face. Some of them can't even, right? Like this does 2 damage to an opponent's face, but only when it removes a creature. In tempo, that's really good value, but that can't go direct face. So we really do need cheaper creatures. This does not fill that role. We would much rather have a Hadi Djinn than a Sphinx of Clear Skies almost all of the time. So a 4th Hadi Djinn and cutting one of these is good. But again, you're not going to want to spend 5 mana on this and a tempo deck. So my suggestion would be cut Sphinx of the Clear Skies and adding other creature threats. So actually with this list, I will kind of sort of make my own version, trying to play around with the what Smooth Criminal is trying to do with it, not just make purely my own version, but like make some suggestions and some cuts and some additions and see what we end up with. Let's take a look. And let's see where we ended up with this deck. So I've made some big changes to it, and I'm going to talk through them as best I can. Number 1, you'll notice that our top end is now just solidly at 3 mana. It doesn't have to be that way for tempo, but it is in our deck. That's not exactly true because we added Spectral Adversary, which often we will want to be casting for 4 mana. So this is sort of like a new top end. But yeah, that's kind of what we have. That means that our CMC, our converted mana cost for the whole deck, is actually much lower here, down at 2 compared to before. It was still pretty low at 2.11, which is surprising that it's that low, but yeah, apparently it is. In any case, it's even lower, and I did end up cutting a land. So now we're down to 22, which is what the list was originally posted at, as 22 lands. You could probably go even lower than that, especially if your plan is to play this deck in Magic the Gathering Arena's best of 1 because of the hand smoothing algorithm that will guarantee you more lands in your opening hand. But sometimes we do actually want to hit some land drops that are pretty important. Like a land drop on turn 4 is pretty big so that we can play Hadi Djinn and maybe hold up some form of protection for it, maybe. There's not a lot of great options for that in this deck, but I was trying to lean into what the what Smooth Criminal was trying to design around in the Izzet colors here. So I kind of went down a little bit on the protection in order to enable that strategy. But in any case, we do want to hit our 4th land drop on turn 4 often enough that we don't want to cut too many lands. So let's take a look at what some of the changes are. First of all, probably the most important one is we added Delver of Secrets. Let's see if I can make this card any bigger here. So this is a 1 mana 1/1, not great, right? But at the beginning of your upkeep, look at the top of your library, and you can reveal it. If it's an instant or sorcery, then transform it, and now it becomes a 3/2 flyer. This is really, really big. One of the more competitive decks that in tempo pre-rotation was a deck by Doggart Cubone, or there's variations on it that have a sort of spirit theme to it as well. Yeah, Delver of Secrets is in that deck. I think it slots even better in this deck because it's all about, having spell synergies. But yeah, anyway, this is one of those 1-drop creatures that does a lot of damage that we really appreciate having for tempo. So I added that creature. I also added the 4th Ledger Shredder, as I said I would, and 4 Spectral Adversary, as I mentioned before. So this is a 2 mana, 2/1 with flying that you can flash in on your opponent's turn. So it essentially has haste if you do it that way, or you can use it as a combat trick in dire situations to block out an opponent's thing. But importantly, you can also pay 2 once it enters, or more than 2, to phase out a number of creatures equal to how much mana you spend times 2, essentially. So for every 2 mana you spend, you can phase out 1 creature. And then you also add counters onto this creature so it grows. So if you play this like much later into the game, it doesn't feel quite as bad because it'll come in as maybe a 3/2 or a 4/3. And it's also phasing something out. So you can phase out an opponent's blocker, or you can phase out one of your high value cards that you're trying to protect from, say, a sweeper or from usually spot removal. This is really, really good in tempo. I highly recommend playing with this creature. I think you can get away without it, but some form of protection. If you don't play Spectral Adversary 4 of, I would recommend something else like 4 of Slip Out the Back or something else that gives hexproof. Right now, we're only running 2 of Slip Out the Back, and I actually think that maybe this is wrong. Maybe we want 4 Slip Out the Back and 2 Spectral Sailor, but I do think it is so important to have creature threats on the board. That's why I went this way. But it's a very, very valuable card. A lot of competitive tempo decks, you will see a lot of ways to protect the high value creatures. In our case, that'll most often be Haughty Djinn, and sometimes that'll be Ledger Shredder. So, and sometimes they can hit other things too. But yeah, having protection is really, really nice. And this is a great form of protection because you don't have to replay the spell. It can get around board wipes, it gets around spot removal, and it comes back 1 larger than it was before, and it only costs 1 mana. It's so good for so many reasons. In fact, I just think I convinced myself I am going to go ahead and, especially because we're only running 22 lands, I'm going to drop drop 2 Spectral Adversary and go up to Slip Out the Back. Just for that reason. As I'm talking, I realize this is even better for a few reasons. One of them is we're not playing a enchantment like Combat Research. This is the new one that we're getting in Dominaria United. There is an older enchantment, that we could still play, that's 1 in a blue that allows us to connive when we deal combat damage to a player. I like that connive one. It's hard to say which one's better. I think this enchantment would be better in this deck. But anyway, it's a common thing for tempo, is to have some kind of engine that draws you cards. And this is a common form of engine for tempo because they are cheap auras, and you often need to play protection anyway. However, I didn't include it in this list because I'm trying to respect what Smooth Criminal's trying to do with it and having this spell theme. So if you have 4 more enchantments, that just reduce the number of overall spells that we're playing, and we're already pretty low at 24. These are all instants and sorceries. So if we went down to 20, then it would make it so, our Haughty Djinn wasn't getting quite as big, and Ledger Shredder wasn't helping Haughty Djinn. So just out of respect for that, I decided not to include Combat Research. But another advantage of not playing something like Combat Research is that you don't need protection quite as badly. But a benefit of cards like Combat Research is it's a way to create extra additional added value onto these early/weaker creatures that otherwise might not have that value on their own. So now you're saying, okay, you don't mind being hit by this 2/1 Spectral Adversary, and you're going to save your removal for Haughty Djinn? Okay, well, let me make this choice harder for you by adding a must-remove enchantment onto it. So now you're really saying, if you don't spend your removal now and get into a counterspell war with me or whatever, then, you're kind of dead. And if you do, then great, I'm going to play a Haughty Djinn right afterward, and then you're still dead. That's really important for tempo, is to be able to force them to spend their removal so that you can play your threats later on. And anyway, that's another reason why these enchantment auras are pretty good. Is because they kind of force that removal out of your opponent. I went down to 2 Lightning Strike. I think that having 8 of this effect is maybe not necessary. You might not. You might disagree with me, but that's totally cool. You could play more, but I just don't think we need it, along with 3 Play the Fire, 4 Kami's Flare. And Kami's Flare, I think, is going to be better than Lightning Strike. Like I said, most of the time in tempo, these burn spells, you want to be hitting creatures and planeswalkers as a form of removal, rather than hitting face, and this does both, as long as you have a target. So Lightning Strike is only better when you need to deal more damage to your opponent's face, like this is just 1 more damage, or when you don't have a target. But that's almost never the case of how we use our burn spells in tempo. So Kami's Flare is better, and the benefit is that playing Lightning Strike gives us sort of a 6th copy, essentially. We can play 2 additional copies of this sort of effect. With the fact that we can only play actually 4 copies in the deck. Okay, I went up to the 4th Haughty Djinn, that shouldn't be a surprise. And I also added 4 Urtai's Scorn and dropped, in its place, I dropped the Make Disappear. So the problem with Make Disappear in tempo is that, it's sometimes a 2 mana, counter target spell unless controller pays 2, which is not terrible, but its best value is when you pay the casualty 1. And in tempo, especially with the creatures we have, it's not often that we're going to want to do that. We don't really have any garbage throwaway creatures, maybe Spectral Adversary sometimes, Maybe at a certain point, Flipped Delver gets outclassed, but maybe not even then. So this would feel kind of awkward. Instead, we get this new counter spell in Dominaria United that allows us to it's just a hard counter for 3 mana, as you'd expect, with the upside that if it happens to be your opponent's second or third or fourth spell that turn, then this actually only costs 1 on the blue. So sometimes you'll be able to cast this for just as cheap as Make Disappear, but it's a hard counter that hits everything and does not require you to sacrifice a creature or whatever. So that's what I went with instead, and that's the reason why. We're playing 2 Inspired Idea and 2 Search for the Count's Castle, and I dropped 4 Consider. Consider is not a good way to restock your hand. It is not card advantage, it is card neutral. You spend a card and you get another one. So essentially it's card selection. And the reason why effects like this are played in tempo, like you saw this in Opt in mono blue tempo that won the Mythic Championship, for example, the reason that those are good in specific tempo decks, the thing that they're doing is they're fixing your opening hand. That's the most important thing that they're doing. That's really critical when the tempo is really strong in the format, and the whatever's in your opening hand determines basically whether or not you're going to win the game. TBD whether or not this format is that strong, but also we needed to run a different spell that was actually card advantage because we don't have a good card advantage engine otherwise. Again, we're not playing Combat Research, so instead of playing that, I decided that we're going to play 4 of different spells. We do have Ledger Shredder. That is sort of a engine, but it's not enough on its own. Typically in really good tempo shells, you have like 4 or 8 creatures that are having card draw engines, and you have these auras on top of that. So this is still maybe not enough card draw for tempo. But here's what we're running. We're running 2 Inspired Idea and then 2 Search the Count's Castle. So Inspired Idea, pay 3 mana, and then you can draw 3 cards, but your maximum hand size is reduced by 3 for the rest of the game. Or you can pay 5 mana to just straight up draw 3 cards. The reason why I think this will be good in tempo is because we don't care if our maximum hand size is reduced by 3. Very rarely in tempo are we holding up 4 cards past turn 3 anyway, unless we're way ahead, in which case we don't need to hold up 3 cards. The worst thing that happens is that you have to discard those cards, but we actually do get some amount of value off of doing that from Hadi Djinn, so I don't think it's even that terrible. The problem is you don't want to cast more than 1. I'm just imagining casting this only at 3 mana, because I think it's rare that we're going to want to cast this for 5, so let's just assume we're always casting it for 3. It's nice that it has that additional modality, and practically speaking, we're rarely going to want to do that. So let's just assume it's 3 mana. So you don't want to cast this twice, because then you can only hold up 1 card on your hand on your opponent's turn. Maybe you do that in an emergency situation, and maybe that does get you out of jail free, but we don't want to cast it twice, which means that we don't want to run more than 2. And even 2 copies is a little pushing it. The only reason I think we can get away with running 2 is that we have ways to discard it for additional value in the form of Ledger Shredder. So if we draw our second Inspired Idea after already having cast 1 before, then we can discard it off of Ledger Shredder's Connive trigger. And then still get like a counter on Ledger Shredder, whereas otherwise we might not have got a counter because we would have wanted to discard a land, for example. The other way we might discard cards is the other way we're playing draw, which is Search the Count's Castle. It's a 3 mana, draw 3, discard 2 unless you discard a basic land. This is also a really good form of card draw for us. Maybe even better than Inspired Idea. Maybe we even want to run 4 of, but I do like how Inspired Idea works. So the reason it might be better is that it's instant speed instead of sorcery speed, which is pretty big when you want to... A common play pattern in tempo is you want to pass to your opponent, hold up a counterspell, and then if they don't do anything, you want to have something to do with your mana that's going to help you get ahead, right? Inspired Idea is a sorcery, so it doesn't let us do that, which is a huge downside of the card, actually. But Search the Count's Castle does let us do that. Another reason is that it's not a huge downside that you have to discard 2 unless you discard a basic land, because most often what we're going to want to discard is a land. So this is really just a draw 3, discard 1 at instant speed. So there's an argument that it's even better than Inspired Idea, and I would not be offended if you decide to go for... this is also called Thirst for Discovery, by the way. This is there's like 2 names for some of these cards, right? So Search the Count's Castle, Thirst for Discovery. I would not be offended if you decided to play 4 copies of Thirst for Discovery. I think that might even be better, but I do think that this is it's pretty spicy to play Inspired Idea. And let's talk about what else we cut. The other thing that we cut, I know I'm missing one thing. We cut a few things, actually. These one-ofs, Celestis, Fable, and Burn Down the House. Sometimes in tempo, it's fine to play a one-of spell, like Celestis would be one that could be good. I don't like Celestis in this tempo personally, because it's not doing enough on its own. And in tempo, you really need it to do something. So ramp, let's just assume that this is ramp. It's not, right? It's a card draw engine, but let's just assume we're playing it as ramp. Ramp is tempo negative. You lose speed by playing ramp in the short term, but in the long term, it's tempo positive. So the Celestis is good, especially in decks that have a long-term game plan. So that's mid-range and control. We're an aggressive deck. We're tempo. So the Celestis is going to be less good for us in terms of its mana rockness, which is a big bit of value. I mean, it's just a 3-mana mana rock. That's pretty good. Now, of course, there's the actual engine. Whenever day flips to night or night flips to day, you gain a life and draw a card. And if you do, discard a card. So it's not, it's not giving you card advantage, but it is giving you selection. It's allowing you to turn your bad cards like lands into good ones. I think this makes sense in Smooth Criminal's original list because they didn't have enough card draw engine-y stuff going on. But in our list, we're playing better cards for that purpose, so we don't need it really. So that's why I cut that. But I think you could run it. I think it would be interesting to play in tempo. Fable of the Mirror Breaker, I think, is just too slow. It gives you a 2/2 that can't attack right away for 3 mana. And then if your opponent removes it, you feel pretty bad. It's also an expensive spell in tempo that doesn't do anything the turn it comes down. It can ramp you. Ramp is not important to us, though, as much in this deck. And it can allow you to, loot for up to 2 cards. Discard 2, draw 2. So that's nice. Assuming that it survives and you flip it, like if we ran more protection, then maybe we could guarantee that we flip it. Then this ability does get pretty good because now all of a sudden you're copying a Haughty Djinn, which is probably your best and only real target. And then maybe you're attacking in for a heck of a lot more damage. But that's like the best line with Reflection of Kiki Jiki is copying Haughty Djinn. So that's why I decided to cut it, because I think it's a little bit like Fantasyland that we're actually going to be able to get enough value out of Fable the Mirror Breaker in tempo to justify it in the deck. And Burn Down the House I cut for a simple reason, and that's because it kills all of the creatures. Every single creature in the deck. The only creature that could possibly survive it is Ledger Shredder, but it would have to have connived 3 times and discarded non-land cards. And then the other one in our deck would be Spectral Adversary, but we'd have to have paid its cost 5 times for a grand total of 12 mana. So I don't think that's happening in order to get it over the 5 damage to each creature and each planeswalker. Board wipes sometimes go in tempo, but they're usually cheaper board wipes that only do like 2, maybe 3 damage. I don't know. I guess Storm, what is it? Blow Down the House? Is that the name of the 4 mana removal spell that did 4 damage to each creature? Anyway, that one maybe could go in tempo, but even that's pushing it. And the reason you play those is, first of all, they're better tempo because they're cheaper on your mana. And second is that they typically don't hit your own creatures, or if they do, it's few of them, or you have a way to get around that. In this deck, this will hit around creatures. It's not very good. Sometimes you can make the 3/1/1 Red Devils, and that's nice, but even that's not worth the 5 mana, at least not in a tempo deck, especially when you're only running 23 and in our case 22 lands. So that's my justification, and I'm sticking to it. I want to say thank you so much again to the people who posted their lists. That's Smooth Criminal. Let me make sure that I get all the names Totally Taylor, and also Quite Queer. Thank you so much for being the guinea pigs for this new thing that I'm trying out. And I hope that this was helpful to you. Let me know in the comments down below or wherever else I post this list and respond to you in DMs or whatever if you have any feedback on my feedback. And also if anybody else is out there that wants to have their deck list reviewed, I am really enjoying this and I think I'd like to take a shot at doing this again. So go ahead and DM me or post it in the comments here on YouTube, link to your deck list or whatever, however way you have to contact me. Go ahead and contact me and let me know you're interested. Send me your list and I'd love to take a look at it. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.